Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second presentation of National Science Week. Sorry, my Facebook live streaming just went a bit crazy for a moment. Welcome to the second presentation for National Science Week. It's great to see you. I know we're all in lockdown, but thanks for joining us online. Just letting you know that this meeting, this presentation is being recorded. So if you don't want your image on the screen, then please just turn off your video. I would also ask that you just mute yourself unless you want to ask a question. And we'll go through a few other bits and pieces in a moment. My name is Dr. Alex Callan. I'm from the Conservation Science Research Group at the University of Newcastle, so I'm your host today. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Michelle Kelly from the School of Psychology, also at the University of Newcastle. And we welcome you to this really exciting presentation by Birdlife Australia. So we're joined by Mick Roderick and Kristy to tell us all about Mistletoe, the Robin Hood for the bird world. And I'm sure you're going to love this presentation. I've seen small parts and I'm pretty excited about it. We'll just start with a welcome to country. Thanks, Michelle. So we acknowledge the traditional Aboriginal owners of the lands within our footprint. That's the Awabakal Nation, Dark and Young Nation, Biripi Nation, Worimi Nation, Wanneroo Nation and Eora Nation. And we also pay respect to the wisdom of our elders, past, present and emerging. Like I said, this is being recorded, but Mick and Kristy are really keen for any questions that you have. So you can ask them at points throughout the presentation. If you can see or hear a quiet pause, please feel free to turn on your microphone and ask. Alternately, you can put them in the chat and Mick or Kristy or Michelle or I will ask them when there's a
You're muted, Alex.
I swear I didn't touch anything. How much did we hear, Mick?
You were only muted for about 10 seconds or something. Yeah. So,
okay.
So we heard the bit about asking questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. I touched nothing on the keyboard, but it was inevitable something would happen. So what we might do is we might pull down our Welcome to Country presentation. We might let Mick put up his PowerPoint presentation. And at a point in this presentation, Mick will swap over to Kristy and Kristy will deliver the latter half of the PowerPoint presentation, which is also a good time to ask questions if you've got them. All right, Mick, it's over to you.
Okay, can everybody see that and hear
Great.
me?
We sure can. Thank you.
So thanks, Alex, for both the introduction and the invitation. This is really the first of many talks we hope to give on this subject because it's a subject that's really emerging for us in Birdlife Australia. So here we are talking about plants, even though we're bird people. But as you know, plants are the habitat for birds. And mistletoe is a very important habitat, as you'll hopefully find out. So Birdlife Australia is Australia's largest bird conservation and research organisation, and there happens to be a few staff that work locally on threatened woodland birds. So myself and Kristy Peters work locally on woodland birds and Emily Mowat as well. So there's three of us up here working on woodland birds. And in recent times, we've kind of discovered just how important mistletoe is and how hopefully how easy it is to recover mistletoe from places that it's been lost. And what we're hoping to show you all is that the mistletoe is the Robin Hood for the bird world. And I acknowledge Alex for that great idea. She came up with the concept and we're driving back from a meeting one day. So yeah, maybe it's like Robin Hood. It steals from the rich and gives to the poor. And that's hopefully what we'll be able to demonstrate to you guys today. So thanks for joining. Okay, so first of all, we're just going to bust some mistletoe myths because mistletoe definitely has a bad reputation out there. So hopefully we'll set some minds at ease about the fact that mistletoe is a great thing. It's not something to be threatened by. How is it Robin Hood? We'll get into that and show how this plant really just keeps giving. Then we'll talk about the regent honeyeater, which is actually the critically endangered bird that we mostly work on, that we're trying to recover. It's a locally breeding woodland bird that is literally on the brink of extinction. Kristy will then take over from me. I'll do those first three parts. Kristy will take over and talk about Robin Hood's merry men. One of the merry men is there pictured in the bottom right, the mistletoe bird. I mean, this bird's even been named after the plant. He's such a merry man. And then we're going to talk about a really exciting planting project that we're undertaking. Literally, probably half an hour's drive for most people. It's around Curry. So, for busting some myths. So, a lot of people associate mistletoe with Christmas, and they have this image of the mistletoe tied up in a bow hanging in a doorway. And what people don't realise is that Australia actually has more native species of mistletoe than any other country. There's about 1,500 different species of mistletoe around the world in 5 different families. And I guess the reason for that perception is that the folkloric references to mistletoe stems from that one that's pictured there, the European mistletoe. But in Australia, we have 97 native species. In fact, number 97 was described during the week that we had Professor David Watson up here doing some talks last November. And that's a name you might hear mentioned a few times in this talk, Professor David Watson. He's very active in the mistletoe research space. So they literally discovered the 97th species in the week he was up here. And so he's got his sights on there being 100 species of mistletoe described in Australia pretty soon. Not surprisingly, mistletoes were widely used by Indigenous people, eating the berries. They even made teas from the leaves, and that had uses for medicine as well. And some people may have heard of the term snotty gobble. Snotty gobble might refer to things like G-bungs as well, but it also refers to the fruit of the mistletoe. And it's actually a really sweet, tasty snack. I recommend it. I've tried a few different species. The one that grows in the shirts is my favourite, snotty gobble. So that's that myth busted, I hope. The second one is a really big one, and this is a perception that stands not just the broader community, but even people that probably should know better. People that in our field that have a perception that mistletoe kills trees, and that's probably because when you drive around, in an agricultural landscape, you often do see paddock trees laden with mistletoe, and those trees are really struggling. But in general, mistletoe does not kill its host tree. It's not in the mistletoe's best interest to kill its host, because it would kill itself at the same time. And although that image there is a little bit blurry, you can see that that's just a normal bush setting. And there's, really mistletoe is just another plant in the landscape. That's all mistletoe is. It's just a plant that happens to have its roots up in the trees as opposed to in the ground. But what happens sometimes is if the mistletoe clumps get too heavy, the trees may drop a branch. And when you get in a situation where the environment has been altered, you get all these different changes happening, such as the compaction of soil, the nutrients in the soil changes, the water regimes, the fire, obviously, in a paddock changes. Phytophthora is more likely to have effect, salinity and erosion. So that image there, I guess, is something that a lot of us have probably seen as we've been driving around. That's a tree that's succumbing to mistletoe infestation. But the thing is that tree does not have the normal mechanisms that it has to do with mistletoe than it would in a normal functioning ecosystem. So, trees have to contend with lots of things: the weather, fire, drought, grazing animals, all these sorts of things. Mistletoe is just one of those things that trees need to deal with. When we alter the environment, as you know, when we upset the balance, that's when things go haywire, and that's when you do see mistletoe actually taking over trees and eventually killing them. But mistletoe does not generally kill trees. It's actually a fantastic thing for the trees and the environment that they live in. Then I guess related to that is another common perception that mistletoe should be removed from trees, but that's definitely not the case. So generally speaking, the host plant will remain in a healthy condition despite having a few mistletoe clumps attached to it. It doesn't actually take a lot of the energy of all the resources from the host tree. And in a natural bush setting, you don't really see scenes like that tree that we just saw. You generally do not see that in a natural bush setting. And they actually have incredible ecological benefits by diversifying the fauna. And quite often, because things like brush-tailed possums, they actually love to graze on the leaves of mistletoe, just like a koala loves to graze on the leaves of gum trees. The possums love to do that. So when you see trees that are infested with mistletoe, it could be a simple case that brush-tailed possums just can't get to those trees. It could be as simple as that. So potentially restoring a corridor between infested trees, bringing the brush-tailed possums back, that could be the end of the problem. So we definitely advocate that mistletoe should not be removed from trees, except in some exceptional circumstances for perhaps safety. How are they the Robin Hood for the bird world? So this is a plant that robs from the rich in a sense that the rich is the host. That's the host that is continually drawing energy and nutrients from the soil. And this mistletoe just attaches itself and it gets all of its water and nutrients from its host, but it actually produces its own energy through photosynthesis. Most of the mistletoes we get are found in clumps like that one we can see there, but there are a few that actually creep along the trunks of trees. And the way that they attach to a tree is via this specialized organ called a hostorium, and that's that really dark sort of woody part of the mistletoe plant there. And the tap roots go into the host, and as a result, this plant really makes its own rules. It can provide fruit and can flower really at any time of the year. It isn't necessarily guided by the environment as much as the host trees. And when it takes from the host trees, it gives so much back. Not so much giving to the poor, but the needy. That there are a lot of animals that need mistletoe. It provides a food source. It provides shelter. The leaves are nutrient rich and they're succulent. And a lot of caterpillars will feed on the foliage of mistletoe. And in fact, there are a number of butterflies that are actually endemic to particular species of mistletoe. And it has been shown widely to boost wildlife populations in both natural and agricultural landscapes. So just bringing it back to birds, there's been 33 bird species actually recorded taking the fruit and 41 species taking the flowers. So when you think about it, a gum tree foliage may only really be a food source for a very limited number of animals. Obviously, the koala is one of them, and eucalypts generally, well, they don't produce a fruit as such. Cockatoos might have a chew on the buds of the that are about to blossom. But the thing about mistletoe is that it provides a food source all year round, because things will eat the leaves, things will eat the fruit, and then things will eat things will eat the blossom, and things will eat the fruit after the blossom has occurred. And not just as a food source, it's also a vitally important resource for nesting. And incredibly, 245 different bird species just in Australia have been recorded nesting in mistletoe. That's more than half of all arboreal birds. So any birds that build nests in trees, more than half of them in the country have been found building nests in mistletoe clumps. And that there is a nest of an olive-backed oriole. You can just see the bird sitting in the mistletoe there. So we like to refer to them as the superheroes of the plant world. Even though they take from these big gum trees and wattles and other things that they grow on, they just give so much back. And I've covered some of these points already. They actually provide a food source year round, and the leaves have a very high water content, and those leaves will actually shed a lot more regular than a gum tree. If you can imagine, when you're walking around in a forest and you leave the trail and you're walking across the leaf litter, you're often walking on crunchy, dry gum leaves, and those crunchy, dry gum leaves don't really serve a great purpose for creating a humus layer. But when like a moist layer of fallen litter, but these mistletoe leaves are actually they have a very high water content. So when they fall from the mistletoe clump, the microenvironment beneath the mistletoe clump is quite diverse too, because it forms this almost like a rainforest, almost like a humus layer beneath the clumps of mistletoe. And also just the structure of the mistletoe. I mean, you can just look at a mistletoe clump, and you can imagine being a bird on a hot day, that you would gravitate towards that dense clump of foliage because it provides a bit of shade. And there's a photo there, courtesy of Professor Dave Watson, who I mentioned earlier, that he's taken of a southern boobook owl, taking some respite from the heat over in Western Australia. And many birds will seek shelter in these mistletoe clumps. So mistletoe is that important that it has been said to be a keystone resource. I won't go into the concept of a keystone resource too much, but if you can imagine a keystone of an archway, which has been illustrated there, it's basically the most important building block. And if you take a keystone out of an archway, if you take a keystone out of a species out of an environment, the whole thing collapses. So mistletoe has been said to be a vitally important part of a forest, so important that if you remove it, things just start collapsing. So to test that concept, Professor Dave Watson actually conducted an enormous study where it was a landscape-wide study where he went to different woodlands centred on Holbrook down on the southwestern slopes. And in this study, he actually had cherry pickers out to remove mistletoe clumps from entire patches of woodland to see what would happen. And although he expected that the arboreal birds that fed and nested in these mistletoe clumps would decline, what he actually found was that the arboreal birds weren't actually the group of birds that declined the most. It was actually the ground foragers. And that refers to that humus layer that I was talking about before. So beneath all these mistletoe clumps, you would actually get a microcosm of bird food, insects, spiders, things that birds love to feed chicks. So there's a couple of photos there, a white-browed wood swallow and a magpie lark. They're both feeding their chicks really nice, juicy spiders. The arthropods are a particularly susceptible group to. They need that sort of dense leaf litter to occur. And whenever you have that environment full of spiders and these nice juicy insects, you're going to have a healthy bird population. So it was the birds that forage on the ground just normally, things like trillers, quail thrush, robins, and also the birds that feed their young, these spiders and insects as well. They were the birds that actually declined more than the honey eaters that fed on the mistletoe blossom. So that's a bit of a segue to just checking the time. That's a segue to the nectar feeding birds of Australia. This is a very large part of the Australian bird makeup. So the honey eaters are the largest bird family in Australia. And there's also a number of other birds such as lorikeets, nectar feeding parrots, that mostly seek out gum trees or banksias or grevilleas, those sorts of things for their nectar source. And of course, all of these birds play a very important role in pollination. But sometimes these gum trees don't flower, and we've seen that in the last few years. It's been a very poor three spring seasons for eucalypt blossom. So when the gum trees don't flower, what do the birds do? They turn to mistletoe. And that's what we've seen, particularly in the last few years, that these birds that might normally be headed for gum tree blossom have been sustaining themselves on mistletoe. So I'm going to talk now briefly about the Regent Honeyeater. So the Regent Honeyeater is probably our rarest woodland bird in Australia. It's a critically endangered bird that specialises in feeding on the really nectar-rich eucalypts. It's similar to koalas. Koalas are quite fussy about the gum trees' leaves that they eat. Regent honeyeaters are quite fussy about the eucalypts for the blossom. They only like the trees that produce the really high nectar yields, things like spotted gum, yellow box, mugger ironbark, things like that. But for whatever reason, this bird has suffered an incredibly enormous population crash in the last 30, 20, last 10 years in particular. That graph there just shows you that as recently as 1995, which is only 26 years ago, there were about 1,500 Regent honeyeaters counted by bird watchers and reported to the recovery program at the time. Fast forward to now, we're averaging around 100 birds a season. We only had 82 birds found last year. And we think that the entire population of Regent honeyeaters now is around 250 to 300 birds. So about a fifth of the number of birds that were actually found only 20 years ago. It's quite a remarkable decline. I've just included that slide there because that sort of maroon bar there shows you the number of sites. So back in 1995, it were over 200 different places these birds were found. Nowadays, we're lucky to get birds found at 25 different places each year. So it's contracted in range and has contracted in population. So the contraction has been so intense that it's really now restricted to some key breeding sites. And to be fair, northeast Victoria and the Northern Rivers, they're quite satellite populations. They only might have 1 or 2 nests a year. It's really those sites centred around the Greater Blue Mountains there, the Goulburn River, the Kapiti Valley, the Burragorang and the Lower Hunter. They are the most important breeding areas for Regent honeyeaters as we speak. So serious is the situation for Regent honeyeaters that we are not only breeding them in zoos just to make sure that they don't disappear altogether, but also to occasionally breed birds to be released into the wild to supplement the dwindling wild population. And you know that a species is in dire trouble when you actually start having to breed them in zoos to then release into the wild. That's where it's at with the Regent honeyeater. And these birds do need mistletoe. So Kristy will actually talk about, she will give more context to those 2 photos a little bit later on in our talk. But last breeding season, here's a Regent honeyeater. You can just make out the nest to the right of him. This is in the Widden Valley, and that bird there is feeding young in a nest. We only had about 8 nests across the range found last year, and this is what those birds were feeding on. They were feeding on a type of mistletoe that occurs in those river oaks. That's the needle leaf mistletoe, and as is often with mistletoes, the foliage often mimics the host plant, and so those leaves there actually look like a she oak tree. And there's some other shots there of a Regent honeyeater feeding on the needle leaf mistletoe. So in a sense, so Kristy will take over now, but in a sense, I guess it's fair to say that if it wasn't for mistletoe, Regent honeyeaters could have actually disappeared already. There's been a really poor last 3 seasons. 2017 was actually the last good flowering season where Regent honeyeaters bred in reasonable numbers. And in the subsequent 3 years, it's really been mistletoe that's got them through. So I'll hand over to Kristy to kick off the second part of the talk.
Thanks, Mick. I'll just sort myself out here.
Are there any questions while Kristy's bringing up her presentation?
Yeah.
Because I have a quick one, Mick, just in case we wait any longer. I don't recall seeing many mistletoe in eucalypts in urban fringes or in urban areas. Is that correct? And if so, is that because we're not getting the kind of birds in urban areas that would necessarily use the mistletoe?
Yeah. So there we go. That bird there is the bird that's most responsible for moving mistletoe around a landscape. That's the mistletoe bird. The thing about mistletoe birds is that they don't necessarily spread. They're not like pigeons who might eat fruit and fly 100 kilometres and spread fruit that way. Mistletoe birds actually keep to a fairly localised patch of bush. So they don't really move mistletoe around. In the cities, it might be things like, the old currawong might or a cowell or something might eat mistletoe fruit and drop it on a tree, but that's just really nothing compared to what mistletoe birds do in a forest environment. And I think that's a really good segue to Kristy's talk, because you're going to be really blown away by this amazing little bird.
Thank you, Mick. Now, can everybody hear me okay? Yep, and you're seeing my full slideshow? Good, excellent. Okay, so yes, to talk about one of the main merry men that is responsible for distributing all of the mistletoe fruit across the range of this bird, which is quite wide. It has pretty much an Australia-wide distribution with all of the different species that we have. So it fills a lot of different ecological niches across our country. And its life cycle is inextricably linked to mistletoe. So the only Australian member of a widespread tropical family of flower peckers, which feed almost exclusively on mistletoe fruit. So that's pretty special that we have that bird here in Australia. So what it actually does is it actually squeezes the seed out. It takes all the glucose-rich flesh. Those mistletoe fruit, they're really high in protein, carbohydrates, and lipids. So it's getting a really tasty snack when it swallows that flesh. And when it swallows it, it's actually got such a simple digestive tract, a really simple sac in its stomach there, that it's able to digest little else than mistletoe fruit and maybe a few insects. So then it's actually going to, within 12 to 60 minutes, it's going to actually poop it out the other end, and those sticky seeds adhere to pretty much anything. So that could be a fence post, it could be the ground.
Are you going to go to work without me?
It could be anything that it adheres to, but hopefully they attach to a compatible plant, and then we can hopefully get a new mistletoe plant established. So we could say that mistletoe bird comes to the rescue. So he's our main culprit for spreading the mistletoe far and wide. And a really cool fact that we've recently found out, that they can actually spread 66,000 seeds per hectare per season. And when I tell you a bit later on how many seeds we as humans can spread, you're going to realise that we've got a lot of catching up to do. So next, we are going to try to actually show you a clip from a great documentary called The Private Life of Plants. And believe it or not, this is already 20 years old, this documentary, so you'll have to forgive the quality of the footage, might be a little bit blurry, but I'm going to go and try and put this up now. This is from a BBC clip featuring none other than Sir David Attenborough doing the commentary. So let's have a look at mistletoe birds in action. So excuse me for a minute while I just go to the clip and we'll get that up. Just give me a sec.
Just getting back to your question, Alex, just while Kristy's doing that.
Yeah, thanks, Mick.
I notice for some reason, the one plant that I do notice mistletoe in the cities is the bottle brushes. If people start taking notice of street tree bottle brushes, there's quite a bit of mistletoe in them. I can't work that out, whether the cuckoos take refuge in bottle brush shrubs or mistletoe birds are coming in. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. What is I mean, how diverse are our birds in urban areas when compared with forested areas?
Not as diverse, but we definitely have the types of birds that would eat mistletoe. Like I said, currawongs and cuckoos. Some generalists, like even ravens, anything will probably have a go. Some of the honey eaters as well. I guess it may not be just a case of the birds, but it's where they go and what they do. And so with as we're going to see soon, the mistletoe bird, Kristy mentioned that it's actually missing. It's missing a thing called a gizzard from its so that organ doesn't exist in this bird. So in a normal bird, the fruit from a mistletoe that it's eaten might take, I don't know, I really don't know. It might take a few hours to pass through, whereas in a mistletoe bird, it's literally 20 minutes. So it just sort of gets out there quickly. So yeah, it's a good thought about mistletoe in urban areas. And Kristy will mention a project that is happening in Melbourne, actually looking at that very thing. They're returning mistletoe or planting mistletoe into an environment that is otherwise quite sterile. The trees are plane trees, and Dave Watson, when he talks about mistletoes and because he started the project, Tim Flannery actually apparently walked into a pub in Adelaide and said that he would shout the bar if anyone could show any ecological benefit from plane trees. They are effectively, they are of no use apart from a perch, I guess. They don't provide any food source for any native Australian animals. And so Dave Watson, I guess, thought, well, that's a good tree to inoculate with mistletoe. And so what they're doing is they're actually seeing what birds return to the cities or come into the cities to feed on the mistletoe. So I guess it's kind of doing things backwards. It's planting the mistletoes to see what birds actually come in.
Yeah, and see what changes there are from there.
Yeah. So there are a few years down the track with that. Oh.
Yeah. Have to see how we go. I do have one.
Yeah.
I have one other question if we're not quite ready yet. This is from Mattia in the audience, and she asks, what are the threats to mistletoe itself? What affects their range aside from mistletoe birds?
That's a good question, but they are highly susceptible to drought. So in a drought situation, mistletoes will basically curl up their toes and die before the host plant does. So they are, because they're relying on those nutrients and water high up in the tree, they're very susceptible to that. And also fire. When a fire goes through a forest, all of the other plants will recover and regenerate, but mistletoes are killed outright by fire.
So they have to start all over again.
That's right. And so if people can remember that concept, because that's a really important concept for the project that we're doing that Kristy will talk about.
And Mick, what about mistletoe birds? What's a threat to them? They're pretty scarce on the ground anyway, aren't they?
Yeah, well, no, I don't know. It's funny, like sometimes people will say, like people that look at data will say, oh, geez, mistletoe birds are showing declines. Then they'll show a rebound. That's actually something I think about a lot, Matt. I often think, are mistletoe birds doing okay? Generally speaking, I mean, this is just anecdotally, just my observations. I think they are. I get them flying over Shortland. They must be feeding on stuff it must be mistletoe in the wetland centre. But yeah, it's a really good question, because a lot of these mistletoes across the continent are not completely reliant, but you know, to a large extent, they are relying on that one bird. Yeah.
All right, will we give it a go?
Yeah, enough from me.
Let's try, and you tell me if you can hear the sound, okay?
This is a mistletoe.
Great.
It can only exist in partnership with a tree, for it has no roots of its own. But this is a very one-sided relationship. The mistletoe has green leaves, so it can manufacture food, but it draws all the liquid it needs from the tree onto which it's fastened itself. The tree gets nothing from the arrangement. The mistletoe, in short, is a parasite. The mistletoe family has over 1,000 species. Here in Australia alone, there are 75, so many and so widely dispersed that somewhere or another there is always one in fruit. And that makes it possible for one bird to eat almost nothing else. The mistletoe bird knows exactly how to extract the fruit. The bird digests the fleshy coating of the seed with extraordinary speed. It takes less than half an hour to travel from beak to bottom. The seed, when it emerges, is still phenomenally sticky and has to be wiped off, which suits the mistletoe very well. The seed, when it comes out, remains attached to the bird's behind by a long sticky thread, and the bird has to have a special technique for breaking it. Every time it needs to detach a seed, it has to perform this little dance. It's this stickiness that is the key to the mistletoe's success in getting from one tree to another. Once parked on a living branch, the seed quickly plugs itself in. With a connection to its host's liquid supply, it can build leaves and start making food for itself.
Okay, awesome. Hope you enjoyed that little clip. Thank you to the BBC and to Sir David Attenborough. So obviously you can see there just how efficient the mistletoe bird is at doing that job that we have attempted to do in our project, which I'll get to in a minute. And that documentary is already 20 years old. So David mentioned that at that point we only knew of 75 native species in Australia, but we're now up to, as Mick said, 97, hopefully soon to be close to 100. So it's fascinating to think of all those species that are out there in all different kinds of habitats right across the country. So we're going to have a look next at Mistletoe's merry men. So I'm just going to share my screen again, go back to my presentation with the help of my technical assistant. My husband is off to the side here, just helping me get back onto this. So sorry about that. We did need to actually show that clip from the internet. So that's why it was a little bit tricky.
It worked well.
It was okay. We got there eventually, didn't we? All right. So now we're back to Mistletoe's merry men. So we obviously saw the mistletoe specialist there. And then there is also another species that's a mistletoe specialist in Australia called the painted honeyeater. down below the picture of the mistletoe bird there. So we'll talk a little bit more about that species there and why they're so important. And just one cool fact there, we heard that you know, about 14 minutes from beak to bottom for the mistletoe bird. Painted honeyeater takes a bit longer. It takes them about 24 minutes to poop that out. So that's an interesting little comparison. Don't know if it's got to do with the size of the bird or what it is, but yeah, interesting little fact there for you. So, and then we also do have a lot of other dispersers, but generally they are more of a generalist. They are more generalist in the way that they consume mistletoe. It'll be just a more opportunistic foraging. So we've got the singing honeyeater and the spiny-cheeked honeyeater. So those ones, they're really inland species, generally west of the Great Dividing Range. So they will spread mistletoe and probably are quite important, probably more so than we know, for actually dispersing mistletoe far and wide, because they have the more sort of evolved digestive tract. So they'll move further distances than mistletoe birds and painted honeyeaters would. So that's how we probably do get mistletoe being spread further to different areas, even to islands off the coast of Australia. And then we have the olive-backed oriole that Mick showed before, that actually obviously would eat the fruit and also makes its nest sometimes in mistletoe clumps. And just a range of other opportunistic feeders there, and the possums and gliders that Mick's talked about earlier. So for the painted honeyeater, this species is actually vulnerable at both a Commonwealth, a state and an international level. So it's mostly associated with habitat west of the Great Dividing Range, which you can see with all of those red dots on our map. So that's sort of their core range along the eastern side of Australia and throughout New South Wales inland. So that species feeds mostly on mistletoe fruits as well. An interesting thing is that young birds almost exclusively are fed on the fruits of the mistletoe. So now this bird, while we've got Regent honeyeater on the coast and west of the Divide in the box ironbark and our spotted gum forests, this species is more in like the Weeping Mile, the acacia woodlands. So it's got a special mistletoe that's been adapted that's generally in the genus Amiina. So we've got a grey mistletoe and a wire leaf mistletoe that is really like the favourite food source for the painted honeyeater. There's a great pic there by Chris Saros of the bird doing acrobatics basically to try and wipe the seed off its bottom, which is pretty amazing shot there. So just something else to show you here is just how closely correlated the range of the painted honeyeater is, which is shown by the map up the top to the right of the picture of the bird. So that's from our bird data, showing all of those brown and lighter brown squares are where we've had painted honeyeater records. And then below that is records of the key species, the grey mistletoe, from PlantNet. So you can see there that the distribution of the species is just completely matched with the distribution of its favourite food source. So getting back to Regent honeyeaters and talking about how important mistletoe is to them, we're going to talk about a place that's only half an hour's drive from where I live on the shores of Lake Macquarie here in Eleebana, just over to Curry in the Tamalpin woodlands. Some people might also know of this location near Curry as HEZ, the Hunter Economic Zone. So I'll sort of explain that a little bit in a minute. But one thing that was fascinating about this site is that in 2007, 2008, there was a really significant breeding event for the Regent honeyeaters, and it was one of the largest recruitments into the population at that time. So you can see there in the yellow dots, that was the active nests that were located in HEZ, and there were 20 nests that were located, probably a bit more than the 20, and probably around 100 birds that were actually involved in this breeding event. So yeah, it was one of the most significant recruitments of young birds into the population in modern times. So this was sort of when we really knew that the Tamalpin woodlands was a really important location for breeding for Regent honeyeaters. And then here we have a regent honeyeater. Mick showed this photo before, but this is actually a nest that was found in Hes with a regent honeyeater nesting in a long-flowered mistletoe clump. So that was a fantastic photo that was captured by a mountain bike rider who just happened to know what a regent honeyeater looked like, and he spotted this regent honeyeater on a nest and got that great shot. So yeah, that was a fantastic record. And then I know Mick and his brother got in there and had a good look around and found a lot of those nests at the time. So we also think that birds likely bred there in 2012. We actually had birds present at Hes for over a 4-month period over spring and summer. And there were birds that were still persisting there November even into December. But unfortunately, the birds that were there were actually on private land and we couldn't access that land at the time. So, but we believe that they bred there in 2012 as well. And then in 2018, we had at least 40 birds that were there at that time, and 5 broods were found. So what was actually observed was pairs of birds that were feeding dependent young, and there was at least 5 different pairs feeding different dependent young. And the birds were once again there for 3 to 4 months, which just really reinforced to us just how vitally important this habitat is for the regent honeyeater. And one of the key things that they come back for, you know, they don't come back every year, but what they generally do is come back when we have the broadleaf ironbark, Eucalyptus fibrosa flowering, and it also usually is in conjunction with the flowering of the long-flowered mistletoe. So when those 2 things are there, it provides amazing opportunities for the regent honeyeaters to sustain themselves, to actually feed their young and raise their young at Hes. And so mistletoe is not just a sugary treat, as we've seen, while it does provide lots of energy for the birds, it actually provides a place to nest. And here is a dead mistletoe, so even when it's dead, it's still an important structural resource for regent honeyeaters, which is fascinating. And that's the bird's eye in the little red circle there, and you can see back in, and the mate is sitting up above, just keeping a careful eye over its mate there sitting on the nest. So we've now talked about 2 nationally threatened species that rely on it, and of course the regent honeyeater there being critically endangered. So it's vitally important and a vital link in the survival of 2 of our nationally listed threatened species. So we thought to ourselves, well, you know, what would be a fantastic project that we could do to help conserve the regent honeyeater in the Lower Hunter? So an idea was born to actually try to recover long-flowered mistletoe in this regent honeyeater breeding habitat. And the reason we were doing that was because large areas of the site in 2016 and 17 were killed off in really intense wildfires. So I'll show some maps of that to give you an idea. As Mick talked about before, completely can't regenerate after fire. We would need to wait until those primary seed dispersers spread the seed from adjoining unburnt areas. And we thought, unless we take up the challenge, we thought maybe we try to fast track the natural process. You know, we thought maybe this can be done. So this is the land that we're talking about. So you've got National Park wrapping around the southern edge of that property. So the property is in the orange. But it's quite a bit of a complicated land ownership. So some of the land is owned by Minderibba Local Aboriginal Land Council, but also some of it is in private hands with the developer. And some of you who may be aware of the site know that Ulrich Aluminium is in there. So if you can maybe see there, that's the road coming in, you get to a roundabout, and then there was a little bit of development here that went ahead. But since then, it's basically been a white elephant and it has had no further development. So you know, it's still a very contentious place, which I'll show you here. So you may have heard in the news of late that the developer that owns probably about half of the Hes land proposes all sorts of weird and wonderful things that he wants to do there. So he did have an idea to put a coal-fired power plant there. Probably not the best idea for something that's in the middle of critically endangered species habitat. Then he's also gone off on another tangent trying to sort of go over to the renewable energy source with the battery plan. So So we'll see where these go, but BirdLife have currently got campaigns running to obviously oppose any further development of hares because of its values for Regent honeyeaters and for a whole lot of other threatened species. So as you can see from this red polygons is the fire scar from a whole range of fires that have happened in hares. So you can see a lot of it has burnt fairly recently. So a big fire in 2016 wiped out quite a lot of the area that Regent honeyeaters have nested previously in those nesting events that I was speaking about before. And then there was another big fire in 2017, the Richmond Vale fire, which some people might remember, and that took out another lot of Regent honeyeater habitat as well. So quite a bit of the habitat that wasn't burnt, unfortunately, or ironically, is actually on the developer's land, which we don't have access to. So it's a bit difficult for us to sort of get in there and monitor whether Regent honeyeaters are turning up in that habitat. So you can see here just how devastating those fires were. Everything was gone, including, of course, all the mistletoe resource. Here's just some dead clumps, and this is basically what I found when I went to collect data on you know, how many mistletoe clumps had been burnt and checking that it had really been completely wiped out in these burnt areas. And I found pretty much 90 to 95% of the time all of the mistletoe in those burnt areas had been killed. So unbelievably, the birds did return, but they did only have this little red polygon on the land that we were able to access, and a pair actually came back into that small area and did build a nest, which was very exciting. But unfortunately for that pair, there was a really severe thunderstorm that came through, blew the nest out of the tree beyond repair, and the birds weren't seen again. So that was just really unfortunate, but it did just show that the birds knew where to come back to. They found a little unburnt refuge, and that was really important for them. So we thought, how can we do the job of a mistletoe bird? And as Mick said before, our project is based loosely on a City of Melbourne mistletoe project, where this arborist here is planting creeping mistletoe onto plane trees in downtown Melbourne to boost biodiversity. So we thought, we're going to need some partners. We're going to need to get some help here. So we spoke to our friends at Minderibba, local Aboriginal Land Council, who have been fantastic partners on this project, letting us access their land within the Tamalpin woodlands. Local land services and the Saving Our Species program through the New South Wales government have also been fantastic with just helping with advice and some funding. So really appreciate the partnerships that we've developed while we've been doing this project. So why do we want to plant mistletoe? Well, it's a key resource for the Regent honeyeater and many other woodland bird species, obviously, that we've heard about. And the Tamalpin woodlands where we're doing the project are vitally important, both for breeding and as a wintering site for Regent honeyeaters. And we've had those two really significant breeding events in modern times. So mistletoe can really supercharge a forest, and it does provide those year-round resources. So we needed to get that back into that ecosystem. So we set about setting up our project. We knew that we didn't have much time, so we couldn't do this as a really rigorous scientific experiment like that one that's been done down in Melbourne. We actually spoke to Dave Watson, and he said, look guys, it's not rocket science, just get out there, it's a numbers game, get as many mistletoe up into the trees as you can, and you know, basically see how you go, because it's going to take a little while to get these resources established. So we were out there in spring, summer of 2019 and 20, and we had planned to be planting in autumn of last year. But, you know, as everyone knows, sometimes plans don't really work out the way you think they will. And we don't know whether it fruited earlier than we expected or whether it just didn't fruit well. So we were all set to go, and then we didn't have any fruit. So it was really disappointing. So we did get about 80 fruit collected and planted in June last year as a trial. And then the next time we came back, we were surprised. It took us by surprise. And in summer of 2020 and into 2021, we just had an abundance of riches. There was just fruit everywhere. So we were able to actually collect over 1,000 seeds. So we're now about 6 months post planting those seeds back in around February, March of this year, and we're probably just getting seedlings advanced enough to start monitoring them. So I can show you the results in a minute, just a little sneak peek, but we will be waiting probably around to that 12 months to February, March next year to really see what our sort of success rate has been. So we're also going to do some monitoring of these planted seeds and some bird surveys too in control and treatment sites, so that we can see if we're actually attracting some of those both insectivorous and the blossoming nectarables is what I want to say, back into these areas to feed on the mistletoe. So first of all, we had to go fruit picking. So that was an exciting process. Here's some of the fruits of the labour there that we went out and collected. And this is the long flowered mistletoe that we're collecting. And then that's just an arborist showing there the really sticky biscuit that comes off when you pop the seed out. So that's how we plant it onto the branch. And I'm just going to see if this works okay. This is an arborist getting up into the canopy. So I'll just show you this. So you can see there just how quickly he's getting up into the canopy, nowhere near as quick as you would expect a mistletoe bird could flit around and be getting those seeds distributed, but they were still pretty quick. So we were down on the ground collecting data and planting some mistletoe ourselves, but at the same time we had these arborists that were amazing. Some of these guys are Red Bull champions, if you actually knew that was a thing. that is actually a thing, Red Bull champion tree climbers. So yeah, they were amazing to work with and amazing to watch. So as we said, much greater success, and this is sort of the habitat that we were doing it in. And the arborist said that some of these spotted gums were the most bendy trees that they had ever worked in. They were quite challenging, but the acrobatics of these people was just incredible what they could do. So here they are up there reaching out to clumps. There's a guy there that got up from Australian Geographic taking a photo of the arborist in action, which I'll just show you a little bit later. So here they are right up there getting all the fruit for us. And this is at the same project site. So in the unburnt areas, we could collect our fruit, and then we could take it to the burnt area and transplant it basically on the same day, which was really good because it meant that we didn't have to do too much storage of the mistletoe, which can be a little bit tricky. So the importance of our project, it's what we think is a world first of large-scale inoculation of host trees, and we've done that in a burnt section of the Tamalpin woodlands. So we're hoping that this is going to supercharge the woodland ecosystem and will hopefully get Regent honeyeaters come back to this area for breeding. So this is vitally important. Protecting this area as a key drought and climate change refuge. So early checks look promising. This is some of the results that we've been getting when we're going out. So over on the left-hand side is just these two tiny little cotyledons that the plant actually shoots out. So that's what they get to start off with. And that can just be within, a month or so of germinating. Then you sort of progress to almost something that looks like proper leaves. And then now you're getting kind of 5 or 6 leaves, and that's me on a cold winter's morning out checking. This is a plant that Mick planted, and we were very excited to see that plant's got sort of 8 to 10 leaves now, so it's well on its way. And these ones we really hope will be mature and be starting to fruit within about 5 years. So that's pretty exciting when you compare it to traditional planting methods of planting eucalypts for Regent honeyeaters. It's a fairly quick way of getting a great resource back into the habitat. So this is just quickly, it's just basically if you're a musician, your aim in life is to make it to the cover of Rolling Stone. But we think we went one better. We made it to the cover of Audubon magazine. So that's a US, that's their magazine for their national society over there for ornithologists. In the birding world, that's a really big deal. So Regent honeyeaters made it onto there, and there's a bit of a story about our project in this magazine too. And then there was another article in Australian Geographic. So with some of those photos that the guy from the Australian Geographic, Doug, was up taking in the canopy, and a wonderful photo of the CEO of Mindera Balauk, Tara Diva, there in her people's possum cloak. So it was a lovely story celebrating both the Indigenous importance of the Wanneroo country that we've been working on, as well as the ecological importance. Now, on the right there is the man himself who wrote the book about mistletoes, Professor David Watson. So I really recommend you check that out, get that into your bookcase. It's a really good read, and especially if you want to get out in the field and identify some species of mistletoe in your area. And here's some other resources that are available. We worked with LLS on breaking down myths about mistletoe, and Mick did a video as well talking about our local hunter mistletoe. So you can get that on LLS website. There's also a beautiful birding guide to the Cessnock woodlands that you can access that can show you a lot of different sites that you can go to and hopefully, potentially see a regent honeyeater yourself or see their habitat and look out for the long-flowered mistletoe while you're there. And of course, Birdlife Saving the Regent Honeyeater Management Guide that has all the most up-to-date information about regent honeyeater conservation in there, as well as talking about mistletoe. There's a website for you there to find out all about our woodland bird projects that we undertake. And I'd just really like to acknowledge all of the funders, the collaborators that have worked with us, and a lot of photos that Wanneroo have kindly, Mindera Balauk have, because the photos were taken on Wanneroo country, they've given permission for us to use in our presentation. So thank you so much for listening to us today and joining us on this Saturday afternoon. And we've just got our pair of regent honeyeaters here. And just reinforcing how important the mistletoe is to this species. And I hope we can update you in the future about how our work is going. And just to let you know, we've just won a $50,000 grant through Landcare, through their bushfire lead recovery grants, to continue this work. So we will be able to keep going and go back and collect some more fruit and do our stuff, try to replicate what mistletoe birds do. So thanks, everyone.
Wow, thank you very much, Kristy and Mick. That was fascinating, and that footage was just as good third time round. I really enjoy it. It is just, we've just ticked past 4 o'clock, but I'm pretty sure Kristy and Mick would still be happy to answer questions if anyone has any questions. So this is the time, if you like to, you can feel free to turn on your microphone and ask some questions, or we could then maybe quickly go through some of the responses that Mick's made on the chat to people about the project. Do you have any particular questions at all?
I have one, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, Ben. Thanks.
Can I ask, should we be planting more mistletoes in our own yards, like on private property?
Yeah, you should be. Yes, I'm trying to plant some in my backyard, Bernadette, and yeah, with limited success. But yeah, I think get out there and try it. And I would have liked to say to everyone, it is literally just as easy as popping that seed out, finding a suitable host tree. So just paying attention to what host you got the fruit from, and then finding something similar. But you do actually get some mistletoes that are quite adaptable to growing on things like crepe myrtle. What else, Mick? What else could you put it on in your backyard?
Oh, I've got bottle brushes, grevillea,
Bottle brushes, yep.
Silky oaks. That same mistletoe will grow in silky oaks. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So just wipe it on the underside of the branch is generally the rule, and it just usually likes that because the dew will kind of settle on the underside of the branch, so it gets a bit of water to it. And then you know, make sure it's a well-lit branch. Hopefully you don't have too many possums in your area. That could be a bit of an issue if they come and snip off the leaves once they've germinated. But yeah, I really don't see why not. It's a great thing to try to do.
Yeah, maybe don't do it in a national park, but you know, everywhere else, yeah, it's fair game. And really all you're doing is just doing what a bird might do anyway. And it's great fun. And I've got to say, it is a numbers game. I mean, you know, I've planted about 20 around of the long flowered. I've planted about 20 around Shortland. None of them have survived. So you know, it's a learning process as well. Just do it.
Can I speak? Anyone?
Yeah,
Joanne.
Oh, okay. Hi. Kristy and Mick, that was utterly fantastic talk. Absolutely terrific. So I'm actually lucky enough to have a mistletoe in my backyard growing on a bottle brush. It's growing really low down. I'm going to send a photo to Mick or you and see if you can tell me which one it is. I haven't ever seen a mistletoe bird in it.
That would be awesome. I hope I can ID it.
Yeah.
How long do you think it's been there, Anne? Have you watched it grow over time?
Well, it's been there for at least 4 or 5 years. I think I didn't really become aware of it for a very long time, and then suddenly I looked at it and thought, oh my God, that's a mistletoe.
Yeah, that definitely happens. Like, since we've been working on mistletoe, I guess Kristy and I are maybe a little bit obsessed, but we are definitely noticing mistletoe in places where we hadn't noticed it before. And don't forget that quite often it'll try and mimic the host, so it can, particularly the share-shaped one. That's one that you may not even notice it's there until it flowers. It's really, really tricky to find.
Incidentally, I also have resident possums for whom I have put up possum boxes, but they don't seem to be eating it. So that's good.
Okay, yeah. Plenty more food around, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
So I think, Kristy, you were saying that it's about a 5-year waiting period till flowering. Is that right?
Yeah, to flowering and fruiting, but I think it's fairly mixed between different species. So the one that we're planting, we've been told is fairly fast growing. So, you know, to kind of get it from planting to being suitable for regent honeyeaters to forage off in 5 years is pretty quick, really, when you compare traditional tree planting efforts, waiting, you know, 20 to 30 years before you've got big flowering eucalypts available. So yeah, and also just back to the numbers game thing, I don't think I mentioned, but 90% of the mistletoe seeds will actually germinate, but only about 10% of those will go on to be mature plants. So it's why, you know, we really want to get out there and plant as many as we can. Within reason. I mean, you don't want to sort of overload any one particular tree, I suppose, with seeds. So just kind of keep that in mind, that you're going to get about sort of 5 to 10% germination when you're doing it. But yeah, you really just want to get as much bang for your buck, get a lot out there and see what happens.
Well, we might all start planting it. And Bernie's just noted that we probably need to do a better PR job on ye old mistletoe. So
yes,
a great presentation for us all to learn an awful lot. There's some great compliments coming through on the chat as well.
Yeah, I just want to hone in on, I think it was Bernadette made that, she mentioned that this plant has a bad rap, and it's true. And like, you know, even landholders that are really interested in conservation and work with us on regent honeyeaters, when we've told them about how important the mistletoe is, they've just been gobsmacked, you know. So this is definitely a perception thing that we're trying to turn around. And Kristy showed that leaflet that we've put together about dispelling the myths. You know, we really need to get not just the general public, but even landholders. So David Watson has thought pragmatically about how we can demonstrate to farmers that there is a benefit from having mistletoe on their properties, because it serves an ecological function. So it's that whole system approach thing. Yeah. I think it is just that perception from seeing paddock trees dying with, I literally think that's, it's often referred to as a tree cancer. Like, it's so unfortunate, you know.
We have some work to do then.
We do. You guys can all be mistletoe fairies for us.
Are there any other questions before we wrap up for the day?
I did just see that one there from Matea Taylor there, about whether we're going to plant any other types of mistletoe, which is a good question. While we generally would be looking for the long-flowered mistletoe, the other species that grows out at the Tamalpam woodlands that regent honeyeaters like is box mistletoe. So that's another one that we would be looking to plant. They're the two common species out there that we can get our hands on fruit, but I'm not sure what Mick thinks about, whether we can source anything else that might be suitable.
Yeah, so I can't remember if you mentioned, Kristy, in your talk, the planting we've done in the Kapiti.
No, I didn't get
yeah.
to talk about that.
Yeah, so the mistletoe that's important to Regent Honeyeaters locally is the long-flowered mistletoe. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, about the time when we realised that Regent Honeyeaters were on a very slippery slope to decline, there was a fellow, David Gearing. He was the Regent Honeyeater Recovery Coordinator, and he spent a lot of time in the Kapiti Valley monitoring birds and banding them, etc. And the vast majority of Regent Honeyeater nests at that time were along the Kapiti River in the she oak mistletoe, the needle-leaf mistletoe, in the big old river oaks along the river. So fast forward to about 4 years ago, or now I suppose, during the prolonged dry, every single clump, not one clump survived, every single clump in that section of Kapiti River, where back in the 90s was essentially the nursery ground for Regent Honeyeaters, every clump is dead. So it's not just fire. Fire is the local threat here. Drought, I guess, is the threat out there. So similar to the work we've done here in response to bushfire, we've been out in the Kapiti Valley picking. So we've picked fruit from elsewhere, from around Mudgee or wherever there was a fruit available, and we've planted around about the same number of seeds of the needle-leaf mistletoe into those river oaks. Again, using an arborist to get up into the canopy. So yeah, so we have already started doing this sort of work on a second species. Yeah, mm-hmm. Specifically for Regent Honeyeaters. Yeah, because they are in such trouble, and with the evidence that mistletoe has really seen them through this bottleneck of bad gum tree blossom, mistletoe is that important that's why we're just racing out to get as many of these things planted as possible, and hopefully within that short 5 to 6 year period they'll actually be usable habitat for the birds.
Mick, I'm making a loud sound, aren't I? I noticed on the website there's a place to volunteer with Birdlife. Is that some of the work that people might do if they were to come and volunteer with you?
Hopefully. Yeah, like I guess we are still in the very early days of this project, and there are some sensitivities around access to the Tamalpam woodlands. It's an extremely political space because of the fact that there's been a rezoning to industrial that we're opposing, and the Aboriginal Land Council want to do the right thing, and but at the same time they want to have rights to what they want to do with their own land, and they've been great with us letting us do the work, but they're really just limiting it at the moment to us, a small group of people doing the work. That said, if we end up doing this work elsewhere or potentially down the track in the Kapiti Valley in the post-COVID world, we might be looking for people not just helping putting stems in the ground. There's been tree planting happening in the Kapiti Valley for 27 years. It's one of the longest running tree planting projects in the country. Maybe one day we'll have a team of people out collecting mistletoe fruit and bringing them along to the arborist and sending them up the trees. Like, yeah, I'd love to see that. At the moment, it's just maybe a bit early, but watch our comms, and hopefully there'll be some opportunities down the track.
Maybe like another Willamai pine project.
Yeah, I think Regent Honeyeaters go and feed on Willamai pine.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. It was lovely to have you here. Thanks again, Mick and Kristy, for the presentation. It was fantastic. We have put in the chat, Michelle's put in the chat, the website where you can actually find additional presentations that will be happening over the next week and a half, 2 weeks. So please feel free to access that. That's at streamcommunity.com.au. This presentation was also recorded, so that will turn up on that website too, just in case you want to go and get any more bits of information or watch that amazing footage from David Attenborough again. Please stay safe, stay at home, and hopefully we'll be out of lockdown soon. And I hope you have a lovely Saturday evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Michelle.
everyone.